Hi everyone, my name is Rafael Samaris, and I'm a head of technology and managing partner at Upside, which is a technology consulting company crafting connected experience. And together with me today is Jonathan.
So I'm working as head of product for an African e-commerce company that is called Unema, and I'm helping them building their platform basically.
And today we're going to talk about quite an unconventional topic when it comes to digital space, which is Africa. So we're going to share our past stories from the last year, almost a year, in building a e-commerce and logistics platform for West African markets, which turned out to be very interesting. So now, put yourself in Jonathan's shoes and imagine that.
So yay! You've never been in Africa in your life, and somebody tells you, hey, how about building a startup there? And you're like, why not? I'm Caribbean, and I've happened to have a lot of African friends. And one of them contacted me one day. I know you build products. We happen to have that product, and we want to build a startup in Africa. So you're like, that's fantastic. I'm going to have my own branded products in a new market, so everything should be super cool, right? And
you're doing e-commerce, and looking at trends, it seems like, well, nothing can go wrong. It's just growing very fast. Like there's a huge population, almost 15% of world's population, so a huge market in Africa. They're very active in terms of working, so people have some money to spend on those e-commerces. If we narrow down into West Africa, it's a very, very interesting part of Africa because there are like 16 countries and there are 3 powerhouses. We were focusing especially on Senegal. So those countries, they're experiencing the most rapid economic growth. They're the wealthiest ones. And they're very stable in terms of politics. It's increasing, so it seems like a great place to be at with a new business. And also, the internet, the adoption of internet smartphones is also on the rise. So here's a chart comparing America, Europe, and Africa. So America, smartphone adoption, it's almost stagnating, so there are no new people who are buying smartphones because everybody just has a smartphone if they ever wanted to. In Europe, it's growing a little bit better, but when you look at Africa, that's the part of the world where the adoption is like ramping up really, really fast. So the question is, what can go wrong?
everything. So if you have been following the news about startups in Africa, Jumia and all of them, it's disasters on disasters. Jumia is scamming people, African company, Auchan, Casino, they all failed. So why that, basically? Yeah, so some of the titles, I mean, you probably don't speak French, but you understand Mission Impossible, and you understand Africa, right? So yeah, why all those guys have been non-stop failing? And I was like, so I got the job, get in, started to check news, and I was like, okay, so what do I do now exactly?
Yeah, so after we started working, we started dissecting other companies that tried and that failed. Some of them were already in business, but it turns out that right now they are not there anymore. So we started looking into like what are the factors that are super important, that are super easy to overlook, especially if you live in Europe, if you live in the States. You're used to those markets, to this kind of customers, to this kind of economy. That can be a real problem and can basically put you out of business, and you won't be able to grasp this opportunity that Africa brings. So the first thing that we noticed and that we were also experiencing ourselves quite often, especially during early user testing, is that it's very easy to make assumptions about how people shop in other countries, in other regions of the world. Because if we think e-commerce, right? You look at everything around us. E-commerce, like there's plenty of ready-made software. There's plenty of processes that we know that work. So it's easy to just think, okay, we can just copy-paste what we have, and everything is going to be all right. Well, the reality is that small things like consumer behaviors can differ a lot. For example, one of our first user tests, like for first user testing, we were assuming, so maybe we could build and like design a very first POC for desktop because, well, to make it simpler for people, right? Those economies have been lagging behind for quite a while, so probably people are shopping on their desktops. Well, even in Europe, a lot of people are shopping on their desktops still. What we've discovered very, very soon during our first user tests is that a lot of people don't have computers, but they have very nice smartphones, and that's what they use on a daily basis. So that's a thing simple like that. You focus on what you know in Europe, you overlook this mobile even a little bit, and that's a huge problem for customers to use your products. The other thing is that trust is a very interesting problem because what we learned is that, for example, in Senegal, a lot of people are very close with their families, with their friends, so they meet a lot, and that's like the major factor, like word of mouth is one of the major factors that can build your trust. So it's not about putting nice advertising, not about doing transparent pricing, all of those things we know in here. It's about just getting this critical mass of consumers, of people living in those markets who will just go out, tell their families during family dinners, which can be like, whole family getting together, and who can say a good word about your business. So that's super important, and that's very easy to overlook, but it's the way that you need to take in order to enter those markets successfully. So that's one of those things. And speaking of trust, if you think about e-commerce businesses, in Africa, a lot of people already have very bad experiences with e-commerce. One of the reasons is that e-commerce is part digital, right? That's what we use. Like when we go on a website, we choose products, we purchase them. But the other part is about actually moving a product, a package from point A to point B to the customer. And that's a very, very hard part operationally. And what's interesting is if you look at Europe, you have like DHL, FedEx, etc., who they had plenty of time to master this art of moving product from point A to point B. Whereas in Africa, it's mostly a very immature place with a lot of startups who are still experimenting, who are learning how to provide this good customer experience. So at the end of the day, you also have to have good relations with them. You have to have good local partners who can support you, because otherwise it's going to be hard. We also learned that in terms of trust, there's this thing that you need to adapt your products to your customers' habits. So one of the most surprising things that we learned is that some people don't have an address. So at some point, we were testing the checkout process.
You live somewhere, right? But
Yeah.
it's just that,
Yeah, it's like they have a home, but this home doesn't have an address. So we were testing checkout process, which was pretty much copy-paste from what we know from Europe, which is the address line number 1, address line number 2, city, zip code, exactly, and country, which is like just one country. The thing is that people first, I think they had postal codes, but they weren't using that.
Yeah.
Nobody knew their postal code.
It exists, but they wouldn't know it, so they wouldn't never use it.
Yeah. So that was funny, but it's also, if you have things like that, it also says, all right, those guys are outsiders, they don't know us. The other thing was that we learned that there's a custom field that all of their delivery companies, postal companies use, which is called landmark. And that's for people who don't have a address. So they can just say, all right, so it's like when you drive this road, there's a huge tree that you're definitely going to see, and then you turn right, drive for like half a kilometer, and that's my house. It's in the middle of nowhere. So this is super important because without this, some people aren't just able to make purchases, and this definitely impacts their trust to your services, right? And there's also a huge amount of people living there who have the money, but for example, they don't use banks. Which brings us to payments, which turned out to be like super challenging part, because once again, Europe, US, we have banks. We store most of our savings in banks. We just use cash for like current purchases. We have credit cards, or we have fast bank transfers that we can rely on. So payments can be done instantly, even for like large sums of money. It turns out that countries like Senegal, they still rely on cash. So you may see people who take a lot of cash and go buy a car for cash. It's normal. That's how you store it. You don't trust banks that much. Some people may have credit cards, but you may run into issues where those credit cards cannot be used for purchases outside of Senegal, which is also challenging. So you have to work around that. There's one really cool startup that it's not a startup. It's actually like digital wallets. They're a huge thing in there. So maybe you can show a video. That's an ad of the leading digital wallet. So even though they don't have bank accounts, they use smartphones for payments.
Orange Money,
That is an ad of Orange Money, which is the provider.
yónneel xaalis ci sutura doo ci fay dara donte sax ci kay jot bitim réew la ne Orange Money.
So basically what happens is that because there is no culture of banking, they need both spots. This is like a TV show that is on TV in Senegal. It's in Wolof, so it's one of the 5 languages used in Senegal. And they explain people the value of giving their money to that guy in an orange box, right? And that it's going to be practical. So our orange money is going to help them buy stuff online. Because there is that same issue of trust happening.
It turns out that those booths, even if you're in the middle of nowhere, there's one somewhere in the neighborhood. So you can top up your digital wallet and you can still use those services. So this is like a very interesting insight that we got. Other things that you have to deal with is that, first of all, you have to adapt to local currencies. Even though in our case, the business is about importing American, European high-quality products, you still need to have this option of paying in West African francs, which is the local currency. And at the same time, it turns out that a huge part of like the younger population, they live abroad. They move to European countries, to the US, just to earn money, right? But they still give back their families. So sometimes they just want to buy something for their families, and we still have to allow that because they also have huge purchasing power, and they're also our customer. Which brings us once again to focusing on trust. We need to adapt our payment system so that people who use banking, who use payments in different way, can easily access that in a natural way. And another thing that we've noticed is that there's a lot of businesses who try to make investments in Africa, but kind of like lack respect to people living there, which is like you set up a business there, but you do not work with local partners, which obviously the community will sooner or later figure out, and they will have problems with that, because it's kind of like you're getting there just to make money of them, not to support the whole community. And we also learned that working with local talent, with local partners, they can also give you a huge boost in terms of your knowledge about the market. So, but you have to make use of that. You have to give back in order not to like exploit, because they're very well. They notice that right away. There's a long history of that. Also, in terms of customer experience, you cannot give this feeling that it's not like your major customer. So those countries, they're getting wealthy. They have access to the internet. They know European, American quality products. So you cannot just send their like cheap stuff. You need to give them quality products. You need to make this accessible, and you need to like live up to this Western customer experience in order to be trusted. Once again, it's about trust.
Okay. So that being said, we had an inventory of issues, right, that we need to address. So how do we do that with our mandate? So the first thing I want to focus on is definitions. I'm sorry, it's dictionary, Merriam-Webster. Definitions between sympathy and empathy. So what happens in our design community, we talk a lot about empathy. We need to be empathic. But empathy is actually feeling what the other person, being able to feel what the other person feels. I will never be able to have empathy with a woman who is pregnant because I will never be pregnant, I think. But I can develop sympathy. But that also means that if I create a tool which addresses pregnant women, I need to have pregnant women in my team to try to have this understanding. And this is something that lacked a lot. All those companies that you see that failed, they lacked this model because they shipped a bunch of designers and developers from France, from the UK, from Germany, and they didn't know the local market. So they just adapted and did those errors. So that was the first thing. So this being said, we need to understand the culture. We need to understand, we don't go there to change the way and being like new colonizer, oh, this is the way we do things in Europe. Yeah, we don't do that. We first took time to understand how do you do commerce right now and what are your processes, map them out, and then from that, see how we can improve them with our knowledge. We have constant user research. We don't do cycles of I'm going to do user research 1 week, then stop. No, we have I have user research sessions every week with people living in Senegal that might be that are our target, and also people from the diaspora. You want to have locals at decision-making positions. So what happened a lot in tech is that they will take minorities and put them at lower positions and say, hey, we have this black guy, so it's cool, right? And they have like no power at all. So they can't change how the product is built. So in our case, Unima was built by 2 members of the diaspora, of the Senegalese diaspora that moved in the US. They succeeded in the US, and they were like, okay, now with what, so we both work for FANG companies for 10 years, and now, okay, how can we push that knowledge back to our country? You need obviously to learn from all the competition. It's not because people failed that everything was bad, right? So you need to figure out what did they do well and what didn't work out. And yeah, beyond user research, because we talk about users, right? But it's people. So you need to understand what are their value, what is the culture, what makes those people want to buy stuff in general. Why would they buy your stuff in the first place? Understand their context of using the web. So yeah, the example that Rafa was saying at the beginning, we had that cliche of, they probably have all computers, because in the Caribbean, it's the case. People have when I was a kid, we have like third-wave computers sent after people use them in Europe, and we're using that. So I was like, we might use desktop. And then I think Unima is used by between 75 or 80% of people use it on mobile. It's like we shipped a desktop version that nobody used. I'm still proud of it, but yeah. And then understand copy in that context. So why copy? There are, and it's the case for a lot of countries in Africa, a lot of languages per country. Like Senegal, it's 5. Nigeria, I think, has like something like more than 100 languages. So they have common languages, then they have local languages. So how do you make copy for people that speak a lot of languages, and how do you make sure that everybody understands it? So we are still actually working on that. And one of the things we do is, oops, sorry, that's a little fast. Okay. Too fast. Okay. One of the things we do is that we do a lot of testing in the copy to make sure that everybody understands the same thing. Next thing is, design for trust. Rafa talked a lot about there is this trust issue. So how do we make people trust us? We are a website, right? And they had bad experience. So we want to create what they call a strong online O2O, online to offline experience. So despite us being a web store, we are opening a physical shop in Dakar, so the capital of Senegal, for people to be able to go there and see that we are real, like we can touch us, and perhaps not touch us, but we exist. And not only there will be people, but there will be a product, as much product as we can, not to sell, just for people to see them, to see how they look like, and all of that. So obviously, I'm not going to be Simon Sinek and explain you the why and all of that, but yeah, share why do you create your brand. There is a lot of ethos about being exploited. It's like the whole history. People coming in, taking everything, coming back, coming in, taking everything. So you need to explain who you are and why you're not going to exploit them. Why you are there as a partner, not just as somebody that wants resources. You want to create a frictionless experience because right now it's very scattered. So very typically, if you're a member of the diaspora, and this I can have empathy because I have the same case in the Caribbean. My mom wants the new iPhone. We don't sell iPhones, the new one. So I will buy them, go home, when I go home, and give it to her. That's the only options. And a ton of people are doing that in Africa. So every time you go back to meet your family, you have that huge suitcase with all the, cuisine, friends, and everything. Like last time, Umar was telling us he took a mattress with him, like seriously, to come back. You need to focus on speed of your website. Performance is a real thing. Connections might not be fast everywhere. So where it's kind of optional here, it's not optional when you design for African market. Accept all payment, we discussed about that, listen, execute. And one example I wanted to take is, and I'm complaining, people who know me know that I complain all the time on Twitter about it. Finding stock pictures of African is a very fun experience. It's, yeah, just go on Unsplash or whatever one day and do just African kid and post it on Twitter. I will just keep it at that. So if one of you want to create a startup that does stock pictures of African people, go for it, please, please. Yeah, and about copy, there is that, so perhaps some of you know Anand Lay, she's very known in the marketing, copy marketing world, and there is a thing that she says that it's not about can I have your attention, it's about may I have your trust, and it's really, really that on the West African market. And last, yeah, how do you solve the output problems? Web UX is the easiest part. The difficult part is how you create an experience of receiving a product that is seamless, considering you have all those issues with addresses, with shipment, with companies, who is going to ship, when they are going to ship, how do I calculate a delivery date, knowing that I need to ship from the US, and there is this is a difficult task. So you need to have people who have that knowledge. And our two founders, the two co-founders, they are coming from the logistic world. And this is the reason of that company. So an example of that, addresses, right? We explained about addresses. So one of the solutions that exists is, it's an application called Free Worlds, and basically it's GPS maps that are given. So you have free worlds, and each sequence of free worlds, it's a key value pair with a GPS location. So you just need to remind your free worlds, you put them, and that's your address, and people have your GPS location. So this is an example of how do you address the fact that there are no addresses, and you need to ship something. And yep.
So, hearing this story, it may appear, all right, so that's just for startups or businesses who want to enter African market. But what we've been noticing, seeing how the economies in those countries grow, is that it may be relevant for more of you than you think in the very, very near future. Because if you look at the numbers and the predictions of how the world's population is going to grow, we're going to see African countries making up for a huge, huge part of world's population. So the prediction is for Africa is 2.5 billion people, because like the birth rate is quite high in those countries. So African population is going to grow. It's going to make up for like a huge part of world's population. A single country of Nigeria may be the size of current Europe, which is quite a huge market. And what's really interesting is that 40% of this population is still very young. So in 30 years, while most of us who are like 35 at this point will still be working, right? Which means that we'll see the need to design for also this market, because it's going to be a huge part of world's population that will need our services, our products. So it's worth starting to think about now, because it's a very, very near future. So this is one of the Bloomberg's editors. So he's been sharing his outlooks for various regions. And you can see that Africa is the one that's booming right now. Asia was like that 20 years ago, probably 10 years ago. Right now, it's shifting towards Africa. And what's also interesting is that the middle class there is growing, which is those people who have some disposable income, who are going to talk to they're going to become our customers, our business partners. So it's also very interesting. They live in a country that had quite a bad economy for quite a while, but those economies are booming. Those people want a better lifestyle, so they're working hard to get it, right? They don't want these like third rate products anymore. They want to have those premium experiences as we know. The internet is getting very, very fast adoption, which means that also the awareness of what's possible is growing. And there's a lot of foreign investments in those countries. Like China's looking there. They're pushing a lot of capital, investing in those startups, even though they're not doing that much of investments in regions like Europe or the States. And to some extent, we may look at Africa as kind of like similar thing that happened to China in the last 20 years. So in 1998, 0.3 of Chinese population had access to the internet. Right now it's quite different. They have a growing middle class with a lot of money. They're doing a lot of innovation. The competition internally is also quite strong, which means that their products are actually becoming the like world-class products that American and European countries have problems to compete with. So you may see more of this in Africa.
So what about my company? No, what about your company, actually? So if we could summarize this presentation, there are 3 points I would like to point out. But you're going to use the tools you all learn. You all learn design systems. You all learn, I'm going to start on Oliver, Figma, Sketch, Framer. I forgot one. I'm sorry about this. So you all learn those tools, right? And those methodologies. But it's not what you learned to the process you learned in your respective countries. You need to adapt them to the local market because it's very, very different. You need to, I was telling him, you need really to have a lot of love for what you're doing. You need to truly care about the people you're serving because we want services. It's not like the 6th clone of Airbnb or whatsoever. There are services that if you go on the African markets right now, they have seen, because they see people from the diaspora. They have Netflix, they have HBO, they see what's happening in our countries, and they want to have access to all those services. So what you're going to build if you go on this market is really going to make a difference. So you need to really care about what you're going to do for your clients, obviously, your customers, but also your partners, people you are going to work with, and your employees. Because for a lot of them, when you go back in Africa and you invest in African developers and African designers, they will appreciate that. So you need to give whatever you have. And you design for the present, of course, and with the limitation you know, but we also know that there is going to be an accelerated rate of change, so you prepare for the future. You don't just put something and be like, okay, that's done, because internet is going to change majorly in the next 5 years. So you need to prepare for that.
But while you're doing that, you may also have some competition that's been growing over the last 20 years. Because if you look at where those big tech CEOs travel, they're more and more often going to Africa, investing their money in there. Yeah. So you can see how often he travels there. He also owns a venture capital fund, which doesn't invest in Europe, it doesn't invest in North America, but he's putting his capital in there because that's where the cool things are going to happen and are happening right now. You can see also Jack Dorsey, CEO of Twitter, going to Africa because it turns out it's also a very good place for Twitter to be at because people like talking, and once they are on the internet, social platforms like Twitter are just the tool. So they want those tools, and they're also like bringing the eyes of those big tech American CEOs as well. All right, so thank you very much.